Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am so glad that you're here tonight because I actually think this is going to be a fantastic show. I have been chatting with Dr. Myke. He is interesting. You're going to like him. And there is no leniency. You're going to take ownership by the time you leave this show. I kid. But you are going to love it. Dr. Myke has been a pastor of a local church for 40 years. And to be with a church for that long is pretty astounding. He is very good at what he does. He has written a book, Why Do People Act That Way and What Can I Do About It? I think that it's going to be something that's very eye-opening for everyone. I found it interesting that his Doctor of Ministry degree was completed by his dissertation, The 5 Basic Emotions, A New Systems Approach. And that's pretty much what we have to work with, right? I think that this is going to be a lot of fun for me. I hope it's going to be a lot of fun for you. I have enjoyed everything that I've read. You can find him on Amazon. And I'm telling you, you can get this book and read it, and you may be frustrated sometimes, and you may not. He does all kinds of things. He is just an interesting man. I think my favorite is that he currently co-owns a school system in Honduras. That is a big deal to me. So, without further ado, because there's been a lot of ado, I am going to bring you Dr. Myke Merrill. Hi, Dr. Myke.
Good evening, Kat. It's very, very good to be here with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I have been looking forward to this, actually. I think it's going to be fun.
Thank you.
So, when you started, did you already have this outlook before you researched and wrote your dissertation?
No. Actually, I have been working on a theory for about 25 years. It would be easy, of course, if you could sit down, if I could have sat down at my computer and just written out my concepts and just be brilliant, having the answers to profound questions. I have not experienced that life works like that. At least it does not for me. When I graduated from my undergraduate and then my master's level education, my center of study, one aspect of my study was in psychology and counseling. You mentioned that I have been a pastor. I've been a pastor of one local church for 40 years and involved in the lives of youth and families for about 7 or 8 years prior to that. So I got my training specifically for the role of being a pastor. And the background of that is somewhat interesting. I had originally designed the course of my life to be a clinical psychologist. And the nature of clinical psychology is that the clinician really has control of the environment. You have an office, you have a setting, you put in certain kinds of furniture, you have certain decorations on the wall, you have a way the person enters that environment and leaves that environment. It's clinical. Mm-hmm. Some people are very home-oriented, and they have couches and soft chairs and end tables and low lighting. Others are very medical, and so the rooms are stainless steel and brightly lit and that kind of thing. So the clinic is really set up by the counselor for that person's own purposes and design. As I prepared myself in psychology and abnormal psych and developmental psych and all those kinds of courses in the undergraduate that are necessary, I was connected into a local church, and the pastor of that church was a brilliant pulpit scholar. He was a very, very gifted man. And as we worked together, and he kind of shepherded and mentored me along the way, we got into many discussions about the nature of clinical counseling and pastoral counseling. The primary difference is not the equipment or the training of the counselor. It's the nature of the environment in which you are providing services to individuals. The challenge that we face often, especially as clinicians, is there is a payment plan. You can sweep that away if you want and do pro bono, but the nature of the counseling relationship is always based on an economy. Somebody's got to pay the bills. When a pastor provides the same services, the question of payment is now either secondary or is actually eliminated. What I found also amazing is that a pastoral counselor, and a person with intervention skills or support skills or corrective skills, whatever they might happen to be, can go into a home where the conflicts are actually occurring. They can go to the hospital where an accident has happened or a person is dying. They can go to the funeral home. They can go into prisons. They can go into any environment at which the counselor is no longer in charge of creating the kind of conducive environment that the counselor wants. Now you are where people actually live. So as I struggled through the sense of what is my calling, what should I do, how can I do what I do best, the issue for me was moving out of the clinical environment, which was safer for me, but much more difficult for the counselee, and moving into their environment, their home, their life, their tragedy, their challenge, and providing the skills that I had in an environment that was much more difficult for me, but it also may have been very difficult for the persons that I was working with. So I decided then, along with some other factors, that I wanted to be a pastoral counselor as opposed to a clinical counselor. The training for me was the same. I had to have the same level of expertise in supporting people, helping them identify what they're struggling with, and then the resources to be able to correct that or deal with it or resolve it. I found as I got into my pastoral work that the psychological models that I had been trained to use actually do not work with the vast majority of real people who are hanging around in the world. They do not want to be psychoanalyzed. If you go into therapy, that is extremely valuable. And that kind of designed clinical work is extremely important. But the average person living life wants to talk about their feelings. They want to jump from subject to subject. They don't want to be driven towards resolution or outcomes from the get-go. They're not interested in hastening the process. So I found that what I had been trained to do was listen to symptoms, develop a diagnosis, what is the person struggling with, then treat the diagnosis because I'm the expert in that field, and recommend some kind of therapies that I think would work, then establish a prognosis and watch what happens as the person moves through the therapies. Did they work or did they not work? Most people actually hated being treated that way, and that didn't work. So I began just simply listening to people, and I spent about 10 years not giving a great deal of advice, not having the answers, not being able to jump to a diagnosis of the person's problems, whatever they might be, in a very quick fashion. I simply listened to what they were saying, how they were saying it, when they paused, why they paused, when they stumbled over a word. I listened to that. And I began to understand over that 10-year period, emotions that people seem to get stuck on fell into 5 general categories, and they would move up and down those categories. It wasn't clear to me at the very beginning that there were 5, but that there were systems that guided the way or controlled the way the person felt was actually a good description. For example, I dealt a lot with teenagers. Teenagers are wanting to get out of their house. They want to grow up. They always think they're more mature than their parents do. They want more freedoms. They want greater access to the control of their own lives. And frequently in families, there are explosions, there are arguments, there is screaming, there is slamming of doors, there is storming out of the house, there's refusal to obey, all those kinds of things. And I began to hear both from parents or caregivers and from students that there was a system of their feelings. They would say, I was so annoyed with my mother. She just irritated me to no end. I just got as mad as a hornet, or swear words or whatever they might want to say. I was furious. I just lost it. And I began to see, you started out annoyed, it went to frustration, you became angry, you were mad, you were furious, you were enraged. And then you could scale that back. Something happened and I began to calm down, I was cooler. And then all of a sudden I started to see what I now call the ladder principle. You scale up, you climb rungs higher and higher, and then you scale down, you go lower and lower. So then, when I was dealing with later individuals, and they were expressing incredible rage that had caught them, captivated their mind, and they were not able to step away, instead of saying, I would like you to stop being angry right now. well, you can't just stop being angry. So I began to say, how about if we take a step down this ladder? I know you are at furious. Could we become really mad and start developing some strategies out of being really mad? And I found that people literally who were throwing things, they were losing their composure in the rage, suddenly said, yeah, I can do that. If I'm allowed to be mad, well, now I can do something with that. And this is over many, many conversations over a long period of time. I began to see anger moves up and moves down. And if I gave permission to people to accept that anger is neither good nor bad, it's what you do with it that makes harm or benefit, then we got somewhere with people families who were very angry, congregations that I worked with that were very frustrated with each other, that were breaking apart. All those things began to fall into the cadence of how emotions would flow.
Yes.
So then I began to experiment with what other emotional groups can I discover. And as I listened, I tested out theories. I finally came up with the idea that there were 5 emotional systems. Then I went to my doctoral program and I said, could I work on this? I've been working at this for almost 25 years now. I spent 10 years listening. I've spent 15 years testing and developing this theory and counseling techniques. Could I come in and do my doctorate on that topic? And they said, absolutely yes. We would just love it when somebody comes in knowing what they want to study. So I spent 3 years engaged in the entire process of refining that concept. I began to teach seminars, be invited out to other churches, to other situations, to school districts, to law enforcement, to all kinds of settings to be able to teach what I had discovered. And over, people coming out of my seminar said, you know what? You really need to write a book. And finally, as I heard that dozens of times, I said, what do you think the book should be called? I mean, 5 Basic Emotions, is that too clinical? And in one seminar, I had stumbled upon the phrase, which became kind of the watchword of that seminar, why do people act that way? Why do people act that way? And the whole congregation, or the people I was working with, they played with how the words changed the meaning. Why do people act that way? Why do people act that way? We had a lot of fun with that. And the person said, that should be the name of your book. Why do people act that way?
Well, because that's one thing that when I was going through your information, I was like, well, yes, because depending on your tone and your emphasis through your sentence, it's a completely different sentence.
Correct.
Completely different question.
And many statements that people make, if they change the inflection of certain words in the flow of the sentence, it communicates a different feeling or an actual different definition. So we've experimented with that as well. Here's a statement. Can you make the statement? They come out with some vehement or some pouty or some brokenhearted statement. And one of the techniques that I've used is, could you make the same statement with no emotional loading at all? Just the same words, as calm across all them as you can possibly manage. And people sometimes struggle with that, but when they reduce out the emotional intensity, loading the sentence, they hear their own words differently. That was an amazing discovery of, you have the right idea, but you've loaded it in a certain fashion. Let's now take your own statement and see where we can go with that. That became extremely helpful.
Well, I've made a comment in chat, and Sherry said, yes, I'm listening, because I have gone on and on about how much I love your book, your concepts, and we're going to have to go to our first break, but I think that this is so relevant to the nature of our world, certainly our country today. That's why I was so fascinated. But it is day-to-day living for yourself that is the biggest takeaway from here. And I hope that people enjoy that. Guys, we will be right back after this. Thanks for being here.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am Kat Hobson, your host, also known as the voice of Fate, believe it or not. I love that. A friend nicknamed me that. But we are the online voice of Fate magazine. I am joined tonight by Dr. Myke, and we are having such a great discussion already. And I hated to have to kind of step in on your conversation. There are times that I wish I didn't have to break. That was one of them. So, yeah, like I said, I think that this is such a relevant topic for, well, really for any time. But certainly now, because it seems that people are just allowing their raw emotion to take over everything and with no filters. And there are people being physically hurt and their lives being destroyed by that. And you sit there and you watch it and you're like, but you look like an adult. And I don't think that really has so much to do with it, does it?
The fact that somebody is grown up in years, that has really nothing to do with it at all. Exactly. I think one of the misconceptions we have is that actual maturity in life comes with a number of years. There's an expression, time heals all wounds. That's not really true. No. And time brings maturity. That's also not true. If a person gets stuck in a trauma of some kind, that trauma, if unresolved, simply stays without any nature of time passing. The human mind is really phenomenal. If your grandmother made cinnamon rolls, but she always loved to put in just a hint of anise, black licorice, just a tiny hint. If you go into a bakery and smell cinnamon rolls with a hint of anise, you can be in your grandmother's kitchen, even though that was 60 years ago. Your brain can take you into that moment instantaneously. That's not only true with olfactory smell, something that's coded into your brain, but it has to do with unresolved events, passionate emotions, events from childhood, and just maturing out of those because years have gone by, not necessarily going to happen.
Well, I still, to this day, and my dad quit smoking a pipe long before he died, but I was in the middle of Atlanta Hartsfield not too long ago, and I smelled his tobacco. And I just immediately turned around looking for him.
Sure, absolutely.
Knowing that he's not there, knowing that he has crossed over. And I'm just like, oh, boy, that stuck deep. But I get what you're saying. You don't get past that.
No, and interestingly, it's not a bad thing to have an immediate sense of your dad's presence because you smelled tobacco smoke that was his particular brand, and your brain says, he's still here, he's nearby, and that's comforting. So it's not necessarily terrifying or scary. It is something that can be very relieving, and to be able to say, even though grieving has occurred, love is still there.
Yes, exactly. You know, when we were talking before, it was about whether, love is bad, anger is bad, emotions being good, bad, not really ever indifferent. That's not really true, right?
I don't think so. One of the premises that I have as a foundation of all the concepts that we teach, whether we're teaching through books and online conversations like this, we're training in corporate settings or in a seminar, we do a lot of that as well, is that emotion is neutral. There is no positive emotion and no negative emotion. I read one of the books that I did my research, that I used in my research, was literally titled The Bad Emotions. Oh. And the premise of the book was you want to build into your life love and happiness and joy, and you want to drive out of your life sadness and anger and pain. And they called those three emotions the bad emotions. Whenever you feel sadness or grief, or if you're angry or frustrated or whatever, those are bad feelings to feel, and you want to be able to get rid of those. And when you're in love and you're full of happiness and life is really good, you want to build your life around that. And as I grappled with that concept, there were quite a number of books that had that as a subtitle or a sub-theme or maybe some chapters in their resources that were devoted to overcoming the bad emotions. I developed a concept: no emotion is bad, no emotion is automatically good. So people ask me to illustrate that. They say, okay, you had made mention during the break, you love doing what you do. And I said, I can hear the smile in your voice when you talk. And the joy and the delight that you have in your field is very evident. One might say you love the broadcast world and connecting with your listeners. Love. What happens if love becomes more intense, more driving, more captivating to your mind and heart? Well, then you say, I am overly devoted to my profession. I am obsessed with my profession. I'm addicted to my profession. I am craving the next opportunity. I cannot step away from this. Now you have the same emotion as love. You want to draw it in. You want it part of your life. You grab hold of it. You pull it in. If you love waffles instead of pancakes, you'll always choose them on your plate. You want them in your life. That's what preferring or liking or loving something is. But when you become addicted to it, I'm not talking physical addiction, I'm talking emotional addiction, or you are obsessed with it, now it has become dangerous to your well-being and anyone who might get in your way. So you say, I love my kids. I don't want them to grow up. So you create situations that disable them from maturing properly. They cannot escape the emotional grasp of your mothering or your fathering, and they remain children called by childhood names, treated in childhood fashion, but they're 40 years old, they're 50 years old, and they're still a child under your control, under your dominance. And you say, a person might say, I just do this out of love. Well, now that love has become suffocating, and the word love no longer applies. Now it's an addiction. Now it's a compulsion. Now it's an obsession to have ownership of that person. So the love in that case is extremely unhealthy and very destructive. So we can't say automatically love is good. There are people who love hurting their spouse. They love cocaine. They love lying. They love thrill that's endangering themselves and others in effect. You can love things that are actually destroying you, and you can love things that bring life and effervescence and happiness. So love in and of itself is neither good nor bad. We have two very key questions that we ask in our training. We teach people how to ask these questions. Number one, what is this event? What is this action, this person, this object? What is it doing to me? What is this emotion doing to me? What is this thought doing to me? And the second key question is, and what do I do with it? Does my love now become destructive to someone else? I have my talons out. I have my teeth sharpened. I have my words in such a way that I can cut right to that person's heart because I am so focused on loving and managing them, never letting them go, that this has become destructive. So what I'm doing with my love and what it's doing to me, those become the really critical questions in moving towards a healthy relationship. Same thing is true with anger. In today's world, we've had events in the last 3 months that cause cultural and personal rage. This event should never, ever happen. And to watch Mr. Floyd's death and say, oh, I don't care. That doesn't bother me. People die all the time. What do we care about that? Or I am so filled with rage, I am going to actually change my world. I'm going to get a hold of something and I'm going to make change happen. That rage is good. It's necessary to bring about authentic change that doesn't just springboard out and then regress back as if it's a spring-loaded object. It's not going to go out and then just fall back to what it was. The rage drives change. So anger is actually good in that case. So it's not a bad emotion. It's what is it doing to you and what do you do with it? Now you can go somewhere with that. Same thing with sadness. Same thing with pain, wound. Same thing with joy and thrill. You can become overly focused on the next thrill experience and you can no longer actually enjoy life at all. So thrill can become destructive, but it can also become constructive. What's it doing to me and what do I do with it? Those are our two key questions.
Well, is it something that you are allowing it to do to you? I mean, are you getting wrapped up in the drama or the emotion of the moment to your own detriment, perhaps? Or is it something that is not personally controllable?
Ultimately, how a person behaves in this world, either by what they do or what they choose not to do, is very interwoven. It's impossible to step outside the total circumstances of your life and say, I'm purely cerebral about this. Really, Dr. Spock was an invention of script writers. There aren't people who lack emotion and are only mentally walking their way through life, that they're Vulcan. The reality is there is an interaction between our perceptions, our emotions, our motivations, and our behaviors. And so when a person is captivated by emotional triggers or motivational conflicts or perceptual inabilities to actually see the real world, the reality is they factor into how do you experience life. And it's not as easy as saying, oh, I'll just think my way out of this, or you can't touch me. A person has buttons, and others can learn how your buttons work. You're not a marionette. You're not a puppet on a string.
That's true.
But
yes.
If certain words, if I know that you are triggered, I just see it. I know you are triggered by a certain tone of voice or a topic that I bring up, then I can plot as a savvy individual. I can plot at a point at which I perceive you are too tired or your blood sugar is low or you're overloaded. Push that button and I know exactly how you're going to respond. So you say, I made you do that, kind of in a sense. I knew which buttons to push. You're the one who is engaging the behavior, but the reality is I knew how to funnel you into that action. So it's not as easy as saying, did life make this happen to me? It's a starting point. And now we...
Mm-hmm.
So the nature of emotion and our experience of the world is actually interwoven, and it's very hard for us to separate out what makes me respond a certain way and how am I doing the responding intellectually or by personal choice. It becomes a starting point anyway, and we can begin to unravel what appears to be the cat got into the yarn basket and has tangled everything up. It looks like it's hopeless. It's not necessarily, but it's a place that we can start.
Well, you know, you've got to recognize what power you're giving to people. Like you said, you didn't cause the emotion. You didn't make them like that. And they were not necessarily aware that you were going to have that power. But
it can happen that way. What's interesting is many people tend to process their life experiences on autopilot. They don't step back and observe their own behavior or their own process. It's just automatically functioning. So their child comes in late after curfew, and there's a sequence that begins to occur that everyone in the family is engaged in acting out a script that's not written, and they follow the lines because it's been rehearsed so many times without actually stepping back and saying, do I want to play this role for the next 25 years until my child is 40? Why am I doing this? We tend to just simply engage in behaviors that are common to us or habitual to us without actually stepping back and thinking. One of the key aspects of being a counselor is being outside a situation, saying, let me tell you what I'm observing. Could you step over here with me and observe your own life as we talk about that? And that becomes extremely helpful to people as well.
Well, that is just so wild. Hello there. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. So, Dr. Myke, we were discussing things that, and if you don't mind, I'd like to touch back on this in case we lost it, about being able to pinpoint something that would create someone's reaction. And so they feel like they're not in control of the situation, and technically they're not because they've abdicated that control where they should be exercising it. And by your education and knowledge and awareness of them, you knew how to trigger it. So triggered actually is a valid word, right?
Yes. It can be trigger, it can be pull the strings, it can be push the button. What I have found in dealing with many people over 45-year period is that in the family structure of when a child goes from infancy with no awareness of the world around them, they are simply at the mercies of the environment, even to survive a few hours, infancy, through adulthood, that 20, 21, 25-year period, the ability to create an understanding of reality is first provided for the child, and then the child learns how to learn about the environment and develops their own understanding of reality. That takes 2 decades, or give or take. The reality is, in every family, those skills, those components that go into understanding reality and the person's place in that reality are either provided skillfully or in an extremely difficult fashion of the family of origin, whatever that might happen to be. So as an individual grows from infancy and utter dependency to adulthood and independency, those skills come in various stages and various ways. When the dominant human beings in a situation, mom and dad, grandparents, aunts and uncles, caregivers, whoever it happens to be, have a desire in their minds, children are property. They exist to serve the interests and purpose of the adults in the room. They can build that sense of reality into that child or into their children. You exist to serve me, to fulfill my life. And parents will actually say that. So they'll say, I was nothing until I became a mom. That I have always had these dreams as a father, and you exist to fulfill my dreams. Well, a 4-year-old, 11-year-old, they have no way of knowing that's not true. That becomes the element of how reality is formed. Well, it's not just said once, it's said over and over and over. So the mother or the caregiver, father can be fathers, mothers, grandparents, are holding this infant little cute thing that's all wrinkled and pink and puffy and doesn't have any words and doesn't really have a formed brain yet. And the parent or the grandparent can say over and over and over, you make me so happy. I am just everything I wanted to be because I can hold you now. And as the child grows into toddlerhood and young childhood and so on and so forth, that message can be repeated hundreds of thousands of times. Absolutely. You exist to fulfill my life. There's a syndrome that's well known called empty nest syndrome. And one of the factors in empty nest syndrome is I exist as I'm a soccer mom. I'm a hunter dad. I'm a scouting parent. I am so-and-so's mother. I don't have a real name. I'm just my child's mother. And the challenge then is when the child gets to adulthood and leaves to go to college or get married or go off on the adventures of the world, what happens to the motherhood of the mother? What happens to the fatherhood, the dadship of the dad? Now, all of a sudden, there isn't anyone to be the dad to anymore. And there isn't anyone that the mother can smother with their role. So now, this adult who's 20, 25 years older than they were when the baby was born is left with, I don't have an identity. I don't know who I am. There are families that become what I would call dysfunctional. They function in a way that's destructive, that has not equipped the children to become adults. That was never the objective. And therefore, the engagement of the child is kept at a childlike or a childish level, even though that human being is now 16 or 26 or 36. The physical age doesn't matter. The dynamic of the relationships are now enforced. Now, is that 16-year-old, 26-year-old, 36-year-old responsible for acting in a child-induced fashion because that's all they've really ever known? That message has been drilled into them thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of times. That's what therapy is for, is to unravel
Yes.
the complexity of that. Because you can't do that. You sit down for coffee and you're eating an ear of corn with your neighbor and you're having a beverage at the picnic table, and all of a sudden you unload. I heard a sound of a gravelly voice, and I broke into a sweat because that's my dad calling me. I'm 41 years old, and I'm responding like I'm a little kid. The adults you're with speak to their child in that gravelly voice. I told you to get over here right now.
Yeah.
And that triggers this huge response. You can't talk about that at the picnic table. Let's go through therapy and undo that one right now. It's just silent, but it's very, very real to be there. So now the individual struggling with that does so as a silent player, following a script that they don't know any other script exists. And that's what I help deal with. And this is true in the business world. It's true in church functions. It's true in virtually any religion. Doesn't matter whether it's Christian religion or any. I've worked across the board in many different faiths. The reality of the human dynamics of experiencing reality and my part in it is a universal part of the human experience. Some families do that extremely well. Some families do that extremely poorly, but the vast majority of us are somewhere in the middle.
Well, that's one of the places that it doesn't, you would like to be like, the epitome of a perfect fit, but I don't think it's bad to be in the middle. And that I know that I was thrilled to be a parent, but it's a lot of hard work. Worth every minute of it, but it's a lot of hard work.
It is.
And I went from having, a football player who left home, then I had, captain of the cheerleaders who had people all around all the time, left home. And then the youngest was captain of the dance team and had people all around. I mean, their friends were my friends, it felt like, and interaction, and everything was great. And then right as the youngest was leaving to go to her dorm, my husband discovered poker. And so I was home at a completely empty house just with dogs, and I had never been alone before. And I was alone a lot. It is a learning curve, but it is something that, you sit there and you realize that I'm not in a very healthy place right now. I was sitting on the chase playing internet backgammon for months.
Oh, wow.
And, it was such a lifestyle change that it was just shocking to every part of me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how to cope with that. And, that's when I called a friend who had basically counseled most of the members of my family. And I said, look, I need a few sessions. I am almost distraught right now. I don't know what to do, and I know I'm not healthy. So I went, we started talking, and 3 years later, I said, I guess I'm done. And it was a wonderful experience to be able to do that. But, because our family had gone through a lot of struggles. We had actually lost a beloved child, my nephew, and we had lost, there were a lot of losses in a very short time. And everything was a struggle. So I was happy that I had grown up in an environment that made that not a weird thing to do. Because I think a lot of what we're seeing out on the street now are people who don't know how to I think there's a lot of intentional intimidation of these people. There are people that are getting off on this because this is something they've always wanted to be part of. But I also think that there's a lot of people who are simply getting drawn in with a mob mentality, and they don't have the tools to separate from that. So
that's good insight. Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine that everybody wants to be doing this. I see in New York months ago when this all first started, they were beating people who were coming out of their business saying, I am a minority business owner. Please don't take everything I have. I'm struggling. And they just throw them on the ground, beat them, and go take their stuff. You know, and I can't think that that's a societal norm. I don't want it to be. But it's just disconcerting to see that in reality, in real time.
I think one of the challenges that we face in this particular culture is how do we disseminate information and form a sense of truth, which is different than forming a sense of what's true.
Yes.
The nature of modern media is if it bleeds, it leads. That's the general theme. The reality is that for the last several hundred years, perhaps since the invention of the printing press in the 1500s, the ability to get information to a very, very large number of people quickly has become the hallmark of human society. The ability to communicate information. Up until then, it was people speaking on location or scribes writing painstakingly documents that only very few people in the world could read. But when Gutenberg invented the printing press, all of a sudden you could take an idea and you could run off thousands of pages of that overnight and hand that out and affect a city, a region, a nation, or the entire world in relatively short order. The question then is, what do people want to read? And if you have ideas that are benign or meaningless or drivel or not well thought out, no one is going to pay the money to buy. I mean, everything takes some money to process. And the ability to function in the dissemination of information is going to die. So you have to have something people want to buy. They want to pay for it. And over the last 400 or 500 years, the idea of having scathing stories, personal injury, some huge climactic event, if it bleeds, it leads, became the nature of news media. When I was growing up, I'm 67, so when I was growing up, there were probably 30 major news outlets. There was Associated Press, there was CBS News, there was New York Times. They had reporters, they had investigators. They managed the way news happened. There were 30 or some number, relatively small. And so there were young boys or girls that would go out on the street with a copy of the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or the Washington Post or the Cincinnati Enquirer and say, extra, extra, read all about it. Get your headline here. And the headline would be blazing across the front so that anybody on the street could see it and say, I'll give you a nickel for that. Or I'll give you $1 for that, whatever it happens to be. And the economy worked. Well, today, how many news agencies, a news agency being how many people collect information and redistribute that information intentionally are there in the world? Well, there's 7.5 billion cell phones in the world. Every one of those modern smartphones can be a source for media distribution. Every one of them. And so now, let's just say, of the adult population of the world, there are 250 million people with cell phones. Every single one of them can take a snapshot, a film, a video with commentary and distribute that through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it happens to be, and become a news outlet. There's not 30, there's not 300, There's not 3 million. There's 300 million. So how is somebody going to read your blog, listen to your story? It now has to be egregious. It has to be horrifying. It has to be blood and guts. They're trying to get control of what's allowed to be distributed and what is not allowed to be distributed. There's 300 million people putting stuff out there, and the number of censors or editors that are out there is, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of people. So stuff gets out. It's on the internet for a while. It gets pulled down. People get upset because their stuff was up and then it's down, on and on and on. The reality is that the most likely story is going to be the most extreme story. So you just mentioned from Alabama that you saw what was happening in New York, and people had shop owners begging, don't take my stuff. And that was the nature of the beginning of June 2020. The reality is that happened in 100 stores, 50 stores. There are 300,000 stores in the United States. 30 of them got ransacked, like 50, 100. The problem is that's the story that carries. If you say, here's a shop owner that he walked up to somebody and said, please don't ransack my store. I'm a person of color. I'm a white guy. I'm a female-owned business. Please don't destroy my store. And the people said, okay, we'll go down because there's other places we want to hit. That doesn't get on the news. Who's going to film that? Who's going to put that on their internet blog and say a group of tough kids went walking down the street, there was a black-owned business, and they said, okay, we won't destroy you. Let's just go, guys. Let's go play Netflix. And I filmed that, and I put that on my Facebook page, and I got 0 hits. Nobody was interested in people being nice. It's the story of tragedy and horrifying, and I've had enough. But the problem is those are true, but they're not truth. The problem we have now is how do we get to the actual truth of the human condition? It does involve that. There's no doubt at all. But the reality is it is far more complex than that. And so when we react to an image or a storyline instead of responding to what is the truth, we tend to find we create more problems down the road than we had earlier because of the reaction, not a response.
Well, that does happen all the time. And Sherry in chat says, yes, that's exactly why I take breaks from watching the news. But we have to take our top of the hour break. And this is a fantastic time to fill up whatever beverage container you have with you. It's a fantastic time to stretch those legs, do a few yoga poses, or just throw a few cartwheels, as Brian Parsons is wont to say. And we will be back. And you all know, when we get out here, I'm always looking for a little good news, right?
Absolutely.
It's going to happen. It's in there. You just have to be paying attention to it. And like Dr. Myke said, don't be focused on the negativity. There is good stuff happening. Excuse me. So we will be back right after this. Thanks so much for being here. Catch you on the flip side.
Live from NPR News, I'm Janine Herbst. After days of President Trump suggesting there were politically motivated delays by the Food and Drug Administration in approving a treatment for the coronavirus, Trump tonight announced the FDA gave emergency use authorization to use blood plasma from people who've recovered from the virus to treat COVID-19 patients. FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn says independent scientists weighed in.
Those scientists have concluded that COVID-19 convalescent plasma is safe and shows promising efficacy, thereby meeting the criteria for an emergency use authorization.
Last week, Trump took to Twitter to accuse the FDA of waiting to approve it for those political reasons.
Well, I think that there might have been a holdup, but we broke the logjam over the last week, to be honest. I think that there are people in the FDA and actually in your larger department that can see things being held up and wouldn't mind so much. It's my opinion, a very strong opinion.
The treatment's already been in limited use, and this authorization expands that. And while it may provide benefits to those battling the disease, some health experts say the evidence has been inconclusive as to how it works or how best to administer it. This as the number of U.S. cases approaches 5.7 million. The number of deaths tops 176,000. Firefighters in Northern California are bracing for more thunderstorms with dry lightning today, which could spark a new round of wildfires. NPR's Lauren Sommer reports 3 major fires are already raging in the region.
It's the forecast that California's fire crews least want to see. Gusty winds and dry lightning. That's what sparked the massive fires in Northern California last week when more than 10,000 lightning strikes hit. 2 of those fires are now the second and third largest recorded in the state in the last century. The new round of thunderstorms comes from the remnants of Hurricane Genevieve in the Pacific. Little rain is expected, and gusty winds could exacerbate the fires already burning. Fire officials have announced new evacuation warnings in the Bay Area, cautioning that residents should be prepared to leave. Lauren Sommer, NPR News.
Top Trump administration officials are heading to the Middle East this week. NPR's Daniel Estrin has more.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He'll also travel to Sudan to encourage leaders there to establish diplomatic ties with Israel. Pompeo will then visit Bahrain, an Arab country believed to be considering official ties with Israel. Pompeo will end in the United Arab Emirates. White House advisor Jared Kushner is also traveling to the region. He told CNN the United Arab Emirates deal to establish relations with Israel means the country has a better chance of being able to buy advanced fighter jets from the U.S. Israel does not want the U.S. to sell the UAE those jets. It wants to keep its military superiority in the region. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Jerusalem.
This is NPR News. A strike at Bath Iron Works in Maine is now over. Shipbuilders voted today to approve a new 3-year contract and return to their jobs producing warships for the U.S. Navy. That means the 4,300 workers will return to the job at one of the Navy's biggest shipyards on Monday. Workers will get a 3% raise and streamlined rules on subcontractors. They've been on strike for more than 2 months. For the first time in months, Hollywood has significant U.S. box office numbers to report. NPR's Bob Mondello has more.
Theater chains waiting for new movies, film studios waiting for open theaters, something had to give. Now the stalemates come unhinged.
Having a kind of a hard time lately.
He's road raging.
The Russell Crowe thriller Unhinged, playing on about 1,800 North American screens, will have a $4 million weekend. Hardly huge, but a respectable start, with most of the nation's cinemas still closed. The film industry anticipates a slow ramping up through the fall as theaters cap capacity at 50% or less. The experience in countries that have flattened the COVID curve is encouraging. In China, where movies have been opening with social distancing protocols for about a month, the homegrown war epic The 800 is eyeing a $100 million gross for its first 10 days. Bob Mondello, NPR News.
In Belarus, more than 100,000 protesters gathered in Minsk demanding the resignation of the president, Alexander Lukashenko. Protesters have been gathering since a disputed election weeks ago that gave Lukashenko a 6th term. U.S. futures contracts are trading in positive territory at last check. I'm Janine Herbst, and you're listening to NPR News.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the second hour of Fate Mag Radio. I am so glad that you are here. we have had just a fantastic discussion. And, you know, I am always thrilled to be able to entertain guests who are a little different, know more than me, and that I can learn from. And I know y'all have all heard me talk about keeping my notes and stuff like that. I take them during the show. I have the ones that I'm using during the show up on my screen, but I keep notes for myself as we go so that I can reference back, and it's always a good idea. I've had shows where I got 1 page of notes, and I've had shows where I got 8. So it just depends on the topics. But, you know, we were talking about the cultural and emotional rage, Myke. Oh, and my guest is Dr. Myke Merrill, and I am so glad that you are here. I have been learning so much from you already, and your book is just fascinating. So,
thank you.
Well, I had nothing to do with it. You did a great job. But, you know, I am interested because we were talking about cultural rage. And then we had April, you know, we were chatting on, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, and the way that, you know, actual studies don't match what's often reported on the news. And, you know, we were talking about truth versus truths. And it's really interesting to me that this goes to such an extreme on the reporting, because what happened to Mr. Floyd was awful, and it shouldn't happen to any human. I have a question for you about the people who perpetrated that, though, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
You know, that was an extraordinary circumstance. I cannot imagine I can't fathom what was actually going on. It's one of those things that make you, you know, believe in Jason Bourne or something. I mean, these police officers, especially the one, was doing this with the full knowledge that there were other police officers standing there watching him do it, knowing that's not what their training is, obviously, but they didn't interfere. And then he knew that he was being filmed, so there was visual evidence of what was happening. It wasn't happening in a void or in a back alley or whatever. And then, you know, it was just unbelievable that this would actually occur, not just because of the horror of the actual murder, okay, but because of the circumstances that surrounded it. They were not normal behavior patterns exhibited by this man from the start to the end. Why would somebody knowingly do that? I mean, what would be the explanation or causation even of somebody going to that extreme, knowing that they weren't going to walk away?
Are you referring to the officer that was kneeling on his neck, or the other 3 officers who were observing that?
I'm referring to the man who was kneeling on the neck, knowing that those police officers were watching. And, you know, I'm curious as to their reasoning too, but also knowing that he was being videotaped. There would be visual evidence of his crime, of his murder. So why on earth would someone continue in that behavior?
You don't ask simple questions, do you?
Well, but I mean, it is an emotional trigger. Something was behind that, whether he was going to get something out of it, perhaps, or whether he was just taking, you know, like I said, it's almost like a programming thing that he just stayed in place the whole freaking time. Never
I
moved.
think one of the realities of that entire situation, let's take that as a specific anecdote. It is not universal, but we're going to take that as a specific anecdote to talk about. The reality now is that we know that George Floyd died as a result of that action.
Yes.
At minute 8 and 46 seconds, Mr. Floyd was determined to be dead. At minute 7, no one actually knew the outcome. One would say he had to have known what was happening. That's not true. So because officers are often kneeling on the neck of suspects who are out of control, that has happened before. They've passed rules against that happening because it is so dangerous and causes great bodily harm. But the reality is that at minute 7, no one knew what was going to be happening at minute 9. You could suspect it, you could guess it, you might think it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you could predict accurately that specific outcome in that specific situation. Since that's the case, in the video, we have to not make our assumptions or our decisions based on what we know later to be true, but only what was known and perceived at the time. My West Coast friend, Mike, his name is also Mike. I'm East Coast Mike, and he's West Coast Mike. We have worked on an entire training concept that we call PEMB. P is perceptions. We have 10 of them. E is emotions. There are 5 systems. M is motivations, and we have put that into a 5-driver concept. And behavior is the B, and there are 2 pathways for behavior. In the area of motivation, we've done a great deal of research and trying to put into words what an intuitive person would understand without using a thinking process to develop their awareness. But most people are not really intuitive on the area of motivation. You've asked a key question about motivation. Why would he do it? That's the name of my book. Why do people act that way? And the subtitle, What Can I Do About It?, follows from that initial question. So the issue of motivation is a central issue in parenting, in small business ownership, in first responders, in the normal course of life. Anybody who runs any kind of a club or a group or any activity that involves human beings, the question, why do people act that way, is going to come up. So we sought, my West Coast friend Mike and I sought to be able to put into language that is teachable and transferable. Because we can teach it, but somebody has to be able to capture that and then transfer that into a working skill that they have in life. So here's what we came up with. We found that motivation works on a scale of what we call fluidity, a fluidity scale. The first motivator we call thinking or conversation. You put into words an idea, and then you process that idea, but it's still very, very fluid. Simple illustration. We're going to get a pizza tonight. And somebody says, well, what would you like on the pizza? Now we have a discussion. It's a conversation. We're thinking about what do we want on our pizza. So of the various people in the room, we say, why don't we get a pepperoni and sausage pizza? And then one individual says, hey, throw some anchovies on there. And the room erupts. It's just a suggestion. It's an idea. It's a thought. It's very fluid. You don't have to have anchovies. You might want to have anchovies. Could we discuss having anchovies? But the reality is that the discussion has moved from highly fluid to the next one down. We have an opinion. We have a viewpoint that is less fluid. It is more solidified. It is more stable. It's more foundational than a conversation is. So when something is at conversational motivation, it's extremely fluid and very unstable. When it's at the next one down, we call it opinion or viewpoint. The next one down, more solid, less fluid, we titled that values or matters of importance. Now, there are core values that go right down to absolutely solid. They are unchanging. That is the way we live our lives. So values can be somewhat less fluid than an opinion, all the way down to rock solid. The fourth driver we call habits. And habits are values and actions and viewpoints that we have practiced over and over and over till they become habitual. This is muscle memory. This is the way we do this. We make that less fluid, more solid even than values. The question then is, why would we make habits more solid than values? And that's because we hold various values in different intensities in our life. Sometimes those values are in conflict with each other. I want people to like me. I also want to spend my money a responsible way. Those are both values to me. I have a certain amount of money. I want people to like me. I want to spend my money in a responsible way. I want to impress others and have them be my friends. Those are both values. Eventually, when it comes down to buying the pizza, and I say, I'm going to be the big guy here. I'm going to buy super large pizza for everybody in the room. I'm going to spend $65 on a pizza with everything on it, and people will like me. So my value of wanting to be liked overrides my value of spending my money responsibly. We get into that conflict of values at war with each other or even in friction with each other on a regular basis. But muscle memory, I'm the guy who buys the pizza all the time. I've done that so many times that everyone else pulls out their purse or their wallet and I say, folks, come on. This is my house. This is the way we do it. I buy the pizza. And now my muscle memory actually guides which of my values I'm going to choose at the time. So we put habit or muscle memory as more fixed than even values are. And the fifth one we called culture. It's when a person says, I am this, and fill in the blank, that becomes incredibly foundational, extremely hard to change. I have a very dear friend, very, very close friend, who just had a stroke that affected his speech part of his brain. Nothing else, just his speech. He's a songwriter. He's a singer. He's a talker. But when it affected his speech, he could think of the words of a song he wrote, but his brain couldn't figure out how to say them out of his mouth. Very unusual part of having a stroke in the auditory part. It was kind of like his brain dumped all the vocal files, and he couldn't figure out how to say the letters of the alphabet and put words together again. Took about 3 months. He started getting all the thoughts back in order in the right file drawer, and we have had conversations right on through this time period. So I said to him, Jim, are you a musician? Something you are. He said, oh, absolutely, I'm a musician. I said, can you play your guitar right now? He said, no, I can't make my fingers do the right chords. Can you sing songs right now? No, I can't remember how to say the words even that I wrote. Do you play music and listen to music that you wrote or others wrote? My mind can't quite figure out how the tunes are working. I said, so why do you say you're a musician? And he said, because that's what I am. A person who gestures all the time says, hey, look, I'm Italian. I'm loud. I'm noisy. We're family. We eat all the time. I'm Italian. When they use the expression, I am Italian, they're now describing their culture. It's not just habit. It's not just values. It's not just opinion. This is something deeper. Will you ever stop being Italian? The person can look at you like you're insane. You can never stop being Italian. I mean, what does that mean? So when you get to the level of culture, it is so deeply ingrained, it is now your identity. Now let's go back to the issue with Mr. Floyd and the police officers.
Okay, but we have to take a break first.
Okay, then we're going to come back to this. Stay tuned because this is really good.
Yes, it is. Y'all don't go away. We will be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back. This is the final segment of Fate Mag Radio. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and we are the online voice of Fate Magazine, and we had to interrupt you to go to that break, Dr. Myke, and I apologize because you were getting into the groove, and I stopped you. I hope you can find it again.
I can.
I'm
good at remembering what I was talking about. So we were talking just before the break about why would the officers either engage in that behavior or disengage and appear to do nothing, which is a clear choice. It's a decision not to do that. In law enforcement, which is very much regulated by the military code of conduct, it absolutely cannot function without order of command. That is drilled into every recruit. It is drilled in at boot camp. It is a military concept that the order of command is absolute. You cannot violate that. The entire system will completely fall apart if you violate order of command. So when the officer who was kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck did not know, he could have suspected and he should have known, but at minute 7, he did not know what we all now know was the case. He was the individual in command. In the law enforcement community, he had a higher rank than the others. The other individuals have a culture of order of command. It's not their opinion. It's not their value. It's not their habit. It is their culture. And without having that be part of the culture of law enforcement, everything is going to break down. It will shatter. It will not be able to function. From outside the military mindset, outside law enforcement, individuals can look at that and not understand at all why is that even a cultural phenomenon within law enforcement. It has to do with the very nature of writing laws and then bringing an entire society into obedience or compliance with the laws of society, so that people aren't driving the wrong way on the streets, on vehicles that have no purpose being on the roads at all, at speeds that are absolutely insane, running people over on the sidewalks, driving into buildings. You can't have that. Society cannot function if there is absolute chaos. Therefore, the vast majority of society follows the rules as enforced by law enforcement. The reality is that within law enforcement, if you had to rethink every dynamic, every action, every word, every part of the process constantly, no human being can do that. It cannot be done if you have to have conversations or rethink every point along the way. So, order of command from the captains to the lieutenants to the sergeants to the rookies, that order has to function, and it is driven into the culture through all their training and everything that they do. When a person violates order of command, that is reason to be fired, lose your pension, lose everything you've ever worked for, whether you've been on the job 2 weeks or 20 years. Does not make any difference. You violate order of command, and you will destroy yourself and you will destroy your team. Therefore, those three other individuals were in their mind, not in the view of the observers, in their mind, they were doing the right thing. We now know that Mr. Floyd was in the process of dying. We now know the outcome of the story, but in real time, they did not know that. And so their motivation in the moment is, I must follow order of command, chain of command. I cannot violate my team, the process. Everything that happens will break down. Now, one of the main issues that we are struggling with as a society is what was happening apparently in the 3rd precinct of the Minneapolis Police Department, that the order of command or the chain of command was becoming twisted with other agendas and other values that were not part of the actual culture of police enforcement. It was an added set of issues. We, as the outside public, did not know that. Even in Minneapolis, they didn't know it. And they're now beginning to uncover and do investigations as to all the various factors that go in. The layers of that onion are so deep that uncovering them accurately, truthfully, and with evidence takes a huge amount of time. It is not something you just pop open a notebook and then read all about it. It cannot be done that way. So in the moment, there are factors in play that the observers and even the person who is filming does not understand the truth of the moment. They only understand what's true. So the other 3 officers didn't jump in and knock the senior officer off the neck of Mr. Floyd, but neither did anyone filming. And there were 8 people filming it. 8 people could gang up on one individual and knock him off their neck. None of them did that. Why? Well, I want to get the film. I want this to go on my Facebook page. Is that more important than a guy's life? I didn't know he was going to die, but no, we only know that now. After the fact, we did not know it. The people holding the camera, said, I'm going to get this evidence, not because Mr. Floyd is going to die and this man is a murderer engaged in the act of murdering him right now. It is, this is wrong. I know this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening, but there's nothing I can do about it. Well, you could body slam him and knock him off. What would happen then? Well, the officers may pull out their guns and shoot you because of that. You say, I don't want to die. I mean, if I go against an officer and knock him off, all hell is going to break loose. Well, you didn't know that was going to happen. So people are engaged in a behavior, but they're also disengaged from other behaviors. The biggest challenge is when we take later information that we know to be true later and then superimpose that backwards and say, I should have known. I could have known. I might have known. The reality is you didn't know and you couldn't have known. So it's incredibly complicated. It's very, very complex. And we say never again. How do you know that in the next 30 seconds an event will be happening outside the door of your house and you won't do anything about it? How do you know? You don't know. After the fact, you could say, well, I thought that it might have happened. I had a feeling. Well, the reality is, at that moment, you did not know. So there are forces and factors that have to do with even the culture of the moment that are incredibly rigid, so solid they cannot be resisted, all the way up to thoughts and conversations. We looked at the motivation of that. Now we can say, what does this do to you? And what are you going to do with it? Now we can work with that, even at the expense of a human being who is now a cultural icon, not just an individual who died. This is a cultural issue for us. And that's why this has such long legs.
Well, that is just interesting because I have really struggled with this. I couldn't understand what was going on that would be a motivational factor for this man to just keep sitting there smirking. You know, his attitude.
We now look at it, but we look at it as a smirk, but that's an interpretation of his face based on how we think we look when we are smirking. The problem is he may have said, this guy is a criminal and he's got a long record and I know him from where I worked before and we've had bad blood before and this guy is nothing but trouble and I am taking him off the street. I am doing everybody in this neighborhood a favor. He believed that at minute 3, minute 5, minute 6, minute 7. He believed that. It was actually not the truth, but his smirk may have been not I'm killing a man, but I'm trying to keep this community as safe as I possibly can. And these folks that are filming this really don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
And he didn't know what I was doing to impose later what we knew on him at the time. That's where the challenge of unraveling, of untangling this incredibly complex event has occurred. Then, of course, there have been other people who have been killed since then. There was a little boy that was 5 years old that was shot by a young black man. And so why didn't he get a big funeral? That there are tragedies that are individual in their ability to change and challenge life. They are individual in their level. There are some that are at the level of family. There are some that are at the level of a community, and there are some that are at the level of the entire culture. And the event with Mr. Floyd is at the level of the entire culture. And that's why it's different. It's different because of the magnitude of its address to the cultural issues, not the family values, not the habits that we have, not the opinions that we hold, or our thoughts of the moment. It's at the level of our culture. And it's trying to address, how do we change our culture? That is incredibly hard to do.
Well, it must be, because I can't imagine that the mayor of Chicago is thrilled with having her city be the murder capital of the United States. And it's so terrifying because that seems to be cultural.
It is.
It's not something that's going to be easy to break. The behaviors. I love Chicago. I truly do. It's one of my favorite cities to visit.
Right.
And I wouldn't go on a bet right now. I really wouldn't, because their numbers are ridiculous. And the protesting is on the Millionaire Magnificent Mile. There's so much stuff that would frighten me, because that's not my culture. I don't pick up a gun to solve problems and to just vent frustration or whatever. And we have another question. We're going to go ahead and do this, but I'm going to add my question to it because I think it's going to blend with Sherry's. What are your opinions on all the protests that are still going strong? And why do you think, even with the public outcry within communities that this is happening, that these protests and shootings are continuing and just keep going on, and now people are being severely beaten, or at least that they're being filmed now being severely beaten. I have heard that was going on the whole time. But why do you think that this is not altering? Is it something that was latent, dormant in these people, and now they have a area where they can release, their inner personality disorder? Or what is going on with that?
There are 330 million people in the United States, and there are 330 million answers to that question. The reality is that the struggle for power, the desire to be compliant, the nature of grace and kindness, the immaturity of adults and children, the questions of the impact of poverty, of lack of education, the accumulation of wealth, all of those countless factors that go into the human condition are in play all the time. What happens in certain seasons is that a set of issues will take center stage. It happened in the 1960s around civil rights. There were certain forces that were driving issues that in 1952 were not the central cultural issues that the vast majority of people were dealing with. It was not true in 1957. But by 1963, with the development of the Vietnam War and international conflict and the advance of rapid communication of information, so that we saw the Vietnam War happening in real time in our living rooms, night after night after night. It was not newsreels. It wasn't managed information. It was raw, bloody, horrible. And then all of a sudden, in the civil rights movement, the idea of being able to take civil rights and put it on the same stage that the Vietnam War was on in American homes now began to occur. So issues that had been latent, they had been quiet, they had been behind the scenes, they had been invisible, now all of a sudden developed cultural power. By the 70s, many of the advances that needed to be occurring in short steps from the 60s had been accomplished. And the news cycles and the focus of our culture moved on to something else. By the 80s, it was something different. By the 90s, it was something different. Then cell technology began to develop, personal computers in the early 2000s or late 1990s, and then cell development occurred in the late 2000s, and Facebook started. Now, all of a sudden, again, issues that have been latent, they've been there, but they have been quieted by other forces in our culture, now are arising back to center stage. So was it always there? It was always there. We mentioned early on in the broadcast that I own a school in Honduras. I've been working down there since 2001. We had an individual that we knew that was running a private school, and he needed footers put in and some floors poured and some walls built, so he had his own facility instead of renting facilities. He didn't have any money, and so our church put together a team, and we went down and helped. And we met some folks, and we got to be friendly, and we thought we could do some programming down here. Our friend that was down there didn't really understand educational process, and we understood that quite well. So from 2002 to around 2006, we went down and helped. We built buildings. We put roofs on. We took educational materials, and we took some early computers, and we taught classes, and we did parenting. And we went down maybe 8 or 10, 12 times to just help out in Central America. Honduras is the number 1 murder capital in the Western Hemisphere. Somalia is in the east. Honduras is number 2. We learned very quickly there are places in San Pedro Sula or in Tegucigalpa or even in Morazan, where we do our school, that you just don't go. You don't walk on those streets after 6 o'clock at night. You don't turn down those alleys. They're very, very dangerous places when that's not your territory, your neighborhood. So we learned very easily, how do we stay safe in the murder capital country of the Western Hemisphere in Honduras? And we learned easily how to do that. We never had anybody be in danger of any kind. I've been there 32 times. We now own property. We own a school system. We have empowered Hondurans to be all the teachers, all the administrators, not a mission school. We're not sending Americans down there and taking jobs away from Central Americans. We created an educational system which they could not create out of nothing. And then we transferred both the knowledge and the skills to our friends who now run their own school system, graduate about 40 kids a year with a good, solid high school education. We learned how to do that. The reality is that the nature of the danger is very specific in Honduras, very specific. And by studying the culture and understanding the dynamics that are in play, one can learn easily how to remain safe in the midst of, right in the midst of, a very dangerous set of circumstances. Same thing is true in Chicago. The people in Honduras, number 1 murder capital of the Western Hemisphere, say to me, how do you dare walk on the streets in your city? People are just simply murdered everywhere. And I said, wait a minute. Are you talking about San Pedro Sula? They're murdered everywhere. And they go, no, they're not. You go to the Mercado. You go to the mall. You go into this neighborhood in Tegucigalpa, you're not going to come out except in a body bag. But who would go there? And I say the same thing is true in Chicago. Same thing is true in Washington. I've lived in both cities. I've lived in Cincinnati during the riots. I lived in Philadelphia. I visited New York City many times. I have not lived in New York City, but I've had family that have lived in New York City, lived in Boston, lived in major cities, St. Louis, all over the country. Every single location of human beings can have periods of great danger and violence.
Truth.
But not every single person in those cities is dead. The vast majority are not. So the question is, how do you understand the truth of the culture and not just simply the reputation of the culture? That's what we seek to do.
That is interesting because my daughter, when she first moved to New York, lived in Bed-Stuy. And I loved it. It was very eclectic.
Which is Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is the Bed-Stuy is what they call that. It's a nickname for a very classy section of New York City, as long as you're at the 3rd level of the buildings and up. Below that, it's still pretty difficult. But third and 4th stories up, that's where it's a different culture. It's not just Bed-Stuy itself. It's the nature of the split between the streets and below the streets and above and how you live. It's a culture. There are cultures that if you understand the nature of how culture works, you can understand how can you be safe in a dangerous location. I have a whole set of stories about Honduras I could tell you we don't have time for that have to do with when they were rioting over the current president getting a second term, setting fires in the streets and insanity going on every single night. I went down for graduation and they were having protests and riots throughout the country. I was perfectly safe because I understood the culture and what was happening in the moment. But that's for another show.
That is.
See how I invite myself back?
Well, I'd already known you were coming back. You may not have known. I knew you were coming back. But, you know, I really appreciate your insights because I know that this actually does tie in with your book because the information that you gather in reading Why Do People Act That Way has a lot to do with knowing and understanding. And, you know, of course, you don't know someone else's life circumstances and what you're dealing with, but you know your own.
Yeah.
So you can recognize yourself if you let yourself in this book. And as far as what can I do about it? There's a lot you can do. So, you know, this book is available on Kindle. You can get the audible narration added to it if you want to listen while you drive. You can get it in paperback. It is really something that I think anyone would benefit from reading because go ahead.
The additional part of it is the book itself is 145 pages of information and storylines and some skill communications. The main book title is Why Do People Act That Way? And that's informational. We seek to teach ideas and concepts. What can I do about it is skill oriented, and we teach skills as well. We do a lot of in-person training. We do virtual training. We go into companies, churches, community centers, wherever there's a challenge that people say, I don't want just facts. I want knowledge, but I also want to know how to do it. And my West Coast friend Mike and myself, that's what we do. We combine knowledge and skill so that character is developed. That's our goal.
Well, it is a worthy goal. And, you know, it's so informative to have been able to speak with you. I think that it's just fascinating. And all the years of education and training that you went through to get to the point where this was what you achieved, I think that speaks volumes too. So thank you for all that work.
I'm very glad to have done that. One of the things that's interesting, when you say the word achieved, it sounds like we're finished, that we've reached the apex and we're sitting on top of the mountain enjoying the view. We are constant, curious learners. We learn, we change, we adapt the principles, we find different phrasing, we can apply in different ways. We are constantly learning and advancing. So what we teach in 6 months, we don't even know it yet. But we will because we are constantly curious. And so we've achieved or attained to this level, and we have so much more to do.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be, I mean, you're already touching so many different levels of emotions that it's pretty good. I like I like all of the quotes in your reviews, but the one from somebody that I believe I actually know, I recognize the name, says, "This book will change the way you communicate with people forever." And I think that's something that, you know, we've been so busy with the I'm okay, you're okay thing, just do you.
Right.
That we forgot that we have to come together as a society in order to function.
Yes. Absolutely
and
true.
You don't get to just act out because you want to. There are societal norms that you're going to have to fall within. And you can work within those norms in order to achieve the change that you want to see. We do every day create change.
Yes.
And, you know, we create it in our own lives. We manifest that within ourselves and our environment by trying just to be the best person we can be. And, you know, the spouse that you'd like to have or the friends you'd like to have, you know, it's possible that just through doing the work. And I think here there's another review that says understanding scale of emotions allows you to recognize and react to danger or not. I think that's important.
Correct.
So, anyway. Oh, so somebody already said it allows you to change your life.
Yeah. Some of it is reaction. Reaction is usually a spontaneous or unplanned, unsophisticated outcome. Response is planned and educated. So when chaos happens, you can either react to it or you can respond to it.
Yes.
What we teach is enough both concepts and skills that a person is able to respond better rather than to react more quickly, spontaneously. What we teach is the ability, when the person who wrote the review and say you communicate with others differently for the rest of your life, that is true, but you'll also communicate with yourself differently. The conversation inside your own mind will change. And that's where ultimately, what can I do about it starts.
Well, I have enjoyed this conversation greatly. I am so glad that you were on, and I look forward to having both mics at some point. So I just think I want to hear y'all's interaction. I hear y'all are fantastic. So I am thrilled to have had this conversation, and I know that it went away from the psychological into societal, but they all go together, so it all works.
They do.
But I look forward to doing this again. Thanks.
Thank you, Kat. This has been wonderful.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And again, for those who are listening, and if you're listening live or listening by podcast, does not matter. We appreciate every one of you. You know, you're the reason that we put these shows together and that we just have such a wonderful time. I am looking forward to all of these week's shows. We are going to be in rebroadcasts during the week of Labor Day because we all vacay on those dates. So I hope that you enjoy the shows that we're going to be airing then. But until then, we will be live. So next week is going to bring a whole lot of exciting stuff. And my guest here on Fate Mag Radio is going to be Ryan Sprague. He is somebody that I have admired for a lot of years. We have liked each other and known each other. He is, oh my goodness, Somewhere in the Skies is his book. It is his show. He is one of the best ufologists I know. And just because he gets after it. So y'all come and listen to that. Thank you, every one of you. I hope that you enjoyed the show too. Good night.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.